friends, and welcome to Bad Book Club, where I, Jade, a silly goose with an English degree, read classic and popular literature so you don't have to. Hello everybody, and welcome to our fourth episode of Bad Book Club about Wonder Part 2. Did you guys miss me? I was gone. Were you heartbroken? It's okay, I'm back now, and I'm so ready to talk about Wonder. I'm really excited because I don't have to go over the author stuff. We already went over that, so I have a ton of time to get into the last part of the book and our discussion. So if it's all right with you, I'm just going to jump right in. In the last episode, we left off with Summer telling Jack bleeding scream. At that point, it switches from Summer's perspective to Jack's perspective. Now, I already mentioned this in the last episode, but the switching perspectives are getting a lot for me. I'm starting to get annoyed while reading because, like I said, I personally don't like it when you switch perspectives. And so far, we've switched from August to Via to Summer, and we're still just getting further away from August. Now we're to Jack. And the other issue for me personally is that every single character has just had repeated events. So we're still getting Halloween from every single character's perspective, and it's getting to be a little repetitive. I don't need to hear what Jack's Halloween is like. The only thing that's keeping me going at the moment is that Jack does not know that he dissed August while August was in the room. So from here on out, what the reader is looking for is Jack's reaction to the knowledge that he hurt August's feelings. And that's the only thing that we're reading for, right? But before that, we were reading Summer and Via for kind of no reason. There was no reason we were looking to read for those characters. So it's just getting tired, personally, for me. Before we go further, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a warning. So throughout this second part of Wonder, I am going to give you some negative opinions because I did have some issues with Wonder. But I hope that you don't take this to mean I didn't enjoy the novel. I really enjoyed it. It was a great read. I read it quickly. I cried. It was a great read. The thing is that all I've done for 4 years is critically analyze novels. So I look for things in the novel like structure, narrative time, pacing, characterization, dialogue. You don't pay attention to that when you're reading, presumably, like I do. So when I'm telling you my thoughts and opinions, it's with that lens on. And while I can see cons of her writing, that doesn't mean I don't enjoy the story. And I just wanted to tell you that because I don't want you to think that you shouldn't read this book or that I hate it. That's not the point. My point is I want to give you an overall feel of what I feel this book did well and also what it could have done better. So anyway, let's jump back into the Jack storyline. Jack's storyline starts at, you guessed it, way back when, at the meeting with August. Actually, more correctly, it starts right before that meeting when his mom gets a phone call asking him to come to a meeting for a kid with physical differences. Jack tells us that he told his mom he did not want to go. He did not want to meet August because back in the day, he remembers going to the park with his brother and their babysitter, and he looked over and they saw a kid wearing an astronaut helmet, and they both freaked out, and his little brother started to cry, and their babysitter picked them up quickly and walked away and felt just awful about how she handled it. Does that sound familiar to you? It's RJ's story. She put in her own little experience there, but this time she put herself in Jack's shoes. I thought that was really cute. When I read her history, I was like, oh, that's really familiar to me because it happens in the book. So anyway, let's keep going. Jack says, no, I don't want to do that. And his mom says, I'm disappointed in you, Jack. Like, you should really be kind to this kid. And Jack's like, Mom, you don't understand what he looks like. And at this point, Jack's little brother comes in and says, yeah, Mom, he looks awful, and like fakes a scream. And after that, Jack turns to his mom and says, okay, I'll do it, because Jack realized that if his little brother, who's mostly kind, can react to August that way, then maybe he should be kind. From there, we learn 4 things. Jack tells us, 1, you get used to August's face. 2, he's actually a really funny and cool dude. 3, he's very smart. In fact, he let Jack cheat off him and didn't rat him out to the teacher, which is questionable morals, but okay. And 4, that given the choice between some kids and August, he would rather be August's friend. From there, we jump to the information that the reader has been waiting to know. How did he react to Summer saying bleeding scream? Well, we learned that Jack says bleeding scream, what the heck? What the heck does that mean? He has no idea what Summer's talking about. He doesn't know what she's saying. He doesn't understand why August isn't talking to him, and he gets a little bit upset. He's like, well, fine. If you don't want to be friends, I'll be friends with Amos and Henry and all these guys. And at the very end of this chapter, he says, well, I am sad about that because these guys kind of suck, and August is better. From there, we go to Jack's recollection of their Thanksgiving break when it snowed. Why do we go here? We'll see in a second. But anyway, he describes to us that he went sledding with his family on Skeleton Hill. And on the way home, he found another sled just kind of discarded. So he took it home and fixed it up, named it Lightning, and that it was super fast and that he wished he could tell August about it. Instead of telling August, he tells his new popular friends, which include Julian and a couple other people, I think Henry and Amos. And he tells them about how for Thanksgiving, he just hung around and he sledded on Skeleton Hill. It's here that we learn that Jack's parents are not rich and that the way they pay for private school is that they both take on multiple jobs. He shares a room with his brother. Like, he's not rich like Julian is, who talks about how Paris is so boring. And in this discussion, he learns that Miles threw away a sled near Skeleton Hill because it was so old and terrible, and that the next day some homeless person had taken it. Jack is able to deduce that he's actually the one who took this sled and turned it into Lightning, and he uncomfortably walks away from the group. He goes to science, where the teacher announces that they'll be doing another science project. Jack, not being good at science, thinks of the Home Alone face where he's going, ah, and remembers that in class on Halloween there was a kid dressed as Bleeding Scream, and he didn't know who it was. And all of a sudden, Jack has an epiphany and realizes it was August. Now, what was he talking about? Oh yeah, how he would kill himself and he only hangs out with him because Mr. Tushman asked him to. Yikes. So he feels just awful, and the teacher actually pairs August and Jack up to do the project together. Can you guess what happens next? I bet you can't, because I definitely did not know this was going to happen. On the way out, Julian approaches Jack and says, "Ugh, you're stuck with the freak. You don't have to be stuck with that guy. Ask the teacher to change it." And Jack's like, "Look, no, Julian, I don't want to do that." And Julian's like, "Yeah, Mrs. Whatever, like, Jack wants to change partners." And Jack's like, no, let's go. And walks outside. Julian follows him, like, "What's the matter? You like that freak?" And out of nowhere, Jack punches Julian in the mouth, which I loved. It was a really satisfying moment that the readers have been waiting for. We heard that Jack was told Bleeding Scream. We wanted to hear him be, feel sad and guilty because we don't like that he heard August. But on top of that, he punches the bully in the face. So I'm all for it. It does make me question, however, what age this book is directed towards. Because if it's directed towards kids, I don't know if you should be punching someone, Like, for adults, it doesn't matter that much. But it does make me wonder who this book is targeted at, like what age group, because I think that'll come into play later on in our discussion. Continuing the story, we jump to Jack in the principal's office. He's telling Jack, this is unacceptable. Kids usually get expelled here for that kind of activity, but I see you're a good kid. Why don't we just suspend you for a couple days because it's almost Christmas break? Jack's mom is so mad, and Jack here won't tell Mr. Tushman why he punched Julian, which again makes me feel like maybe this book should have been skewed more towards middle schoolers. I don't know if in 5th grade it would have occurred to me to not tell a teacher something because it would only make things worse, quote unquote. I don't think I would spare a bully because it would only make things worse. Like, I just don't know if that thought would pop in my head at 10 years old. At 10 years old, if someone did something to me, I'd be like, it was his fault. I'd point at that guy. Because, I don't know, kids don't really have that self-restraint yet. But like I said, maybe that was just me. Maybe I was just immature. I don't know. We do learn, however, that Jack punched out Julian's baby tooth, which is kind of exciting, and I'm very satisfied to hear it. And Julian goes home suspended, knowing he has to write Mr. Tushman and Julian letters of apology. And that's whenever we get into the next chapter, which is just full of letters and emails. Now, personally, I don't really like reading emails in books because I feel like the formatting is always kind of odd. You have to have that like subject line and CC, and I always skip over those. So what ends up happening is I get a little confused because I don't know who these emails are talking to, but I'll get into that. Let's start off with the first letter. The first letter is from Jack to Mr. Tushman saying that he's very sorry for punching Julian and that he still doesn't want to tell him why because he'd rather not get Julian in trouble. Personally, this is another moment where I feel like a 10-year-old would just want to get a bully in trouble because why wouldn't you? But maybe that's just me. The second letter is to Julian from Jack saying, I'm sorry I hit you. I hope your tooth grows in fast. And that's basically it. The third letter is to Jack from Mr. Tushman saying, thank you for your letter. I feel like I know what Julian was saying and keep up the good work. You're a good kid. The next bit is an email rather than a letter, and there's nothing to distinguish it. She doesn't announce that. She just switches up the format, which is a little jarring to look at on the page. But we notice that it's to Tushman from Julian's parents to Jack's parents. Also, both of them have J names, which is interesting. So reading it in a big row like this is getting a little confusing. Anywho, Julian's parents tell Mr. Tushman that they understand why Jack wasn't expelled, although he could have been. And maybe this is because Jack is under pressure to hang out with August. You know, August is a different boy, and they respected Julian's choice when he didn't want to be August's friend. So maybe you should just let Jack off the hook. You know, understanding and friendly parents. Mr. Tushman responds to all those people saying, thanks for your concerns, but Jack is a good kid, and therefore that's why he's here. Second of all, August is not a disabled student. He has no special needs, and therefore there's no special admittance to the school that he had. And turns out Jack is fine being August's friend because he's a kind and empathetic kid. Thanks so much. Which I thought was a hilariously sassy email from the principal and pretty fun to read. The next letter is from Jack's parents to Julian's parents saying, sorry again, let us pay for the dental work. And Jack is very happy being August's friend, but thanks for your concern. Now we switch from emails to Facebook. Again, I don't know why we're switching from letters to emails to Facebook, but we are with absolutely no warning or explanation. It just says, Jack Will wants to be friends with you on Facebook, August. And now we see an email conversation between August and Jack Will. We moved to Facebook briefly so that we could see that August had unfriended Jack from Facebook, I guess. And then we moved to email where there's a lot of really small messages back and forth, but basically Jack says, please forgive me, I want to be your friend. And August says, did you really punch Julian? He says, yes. And August says, well, would you really kill yourself if you were me? And Jack says, no, but I would kill myself if I were Julian. It's a cute conversation, and I'm glad to see that the boys are back. And it is interesting to read something in a different format than what we've been reading so far. But I honestly think that this little chapter here is kind of a mistake, only because, despite the formatting issues, which are livable, I don't like that half of this is not actually from Jack's perspective. We have a whole email chain between Mr. Tushman, Jack's parents, and Julian's parents that Jack is not privy to, so it shouldn't be included in his section. And later we see that Jack had no idea that they were talking about this. So that just seems like a mistake to me. You shouldn't include something in a side character's perspective if they don't know about it. So I don't know about that. But anyway, let's move on. Jack's first day back at school after his suspension is strange because everyone keeps moving away from him, doesn't talk to him all day. He even sits down with some friends at lunch and they switch seats. So Jack ends up eating in the library. Why he isn't eating with August after he just became friends with him, I don't know, but he moves to the library. The next day, Jack learns that there's been some sort of war waged on him. Charlotte tells him Julian started this war, and if you aren't on Julian's side, that they're all going to be mean to you and whatever. It feels very realistic for kids and like the kid world. People always take sides. It's like, oh, what side are you on? That's like a thing that kids do. So that feels extremely accurate. And because of this war, Jack begins sitting with Summer and August and mentions it, and August says, how do you think I feel? Which is a cute and funny line. Then it skips to Jack and August working on their science project. Jack goes over to August's house for probably the first time to work with him and meets his sister Via, and Jack notices that Via hates him because of the bleeding scream comment, and August goes, yep, which is pretty funny. Jack mentions that August has a cool iMac, which makes me wonder why a 10-year-old has an iMac. Do 10-year-olds have iMacs now? Is that like a thing? I don't have an iMac right now. I don't understand why August has an iMac. And this also comes into question how much money August's family has. I mean, he's paid for surgeries. He's going to private school. So is Via. And still, we don't know what his parents do, which I'm going to talk about later. But anyway, then As they're sitting there, Vaya introduces her boyfriend, Justin. Can you guys guess what might happen now? Can you guess what might have irritated your good friend Jade in this moment? Is it because RJ Palacio switches from Jack's point of view to Justin, Vaya's boyfriend we've mentioned once before, who I could care less about? We switched to his perspective. We're now like 5 people away from August, who wrote the first third of the book, and I am tired and just want to get back to him. I don't mean to be a broken record about it. Of course, you already know my preferences. It's just one of those things where I'd had no idea this was a switching perspective book at all, and then suddenly it happened once, and it won't stop happening. And like I mentioned before, with Jack, we at least had a goal that we were interested in hearing when it came to his point of view. And with Justin, I don't even know who this character is. I don't care about Justin, but what can you do, I guess? Let's move on to Justin's section. Justin's section starts out with meeting August for the first time. Something to note about his section is that RJ doesn't use any capitalization. Justin's section, I feel her aim was to create a stream of consciousness vibe, like we're listening to Justin's thoughts or like he thinks a little differently. And while that's an admirable goal, I think that if you were going to change the format for one character, you should have changed it for all the characters. There's this thing that I want to talk about at the end about promises you make to a reader, and I find that RJ really struggles with this concept, but let's just move on and talk about Justin's first time meeting August, because he mentions it wasn't that bad. Like, it was really surprising because Vaya had warned him August had a craniofacial abnormality, but he was still a little unprepared, and after a second he got used to it, but he was nervous, and all in all, it went well. The next chapter is about Justin and Vaya's Valentine's Day. He gives her a necklace and she gives him a floppy disk messenger bag that she made. I guess she's a DIY person. We had a whole section from her perspective, but that was never mentioned, I guess. And then we move on to Justin meeting Vaya's parents for the first time, which also confused me because if he was at her house, wouldn't he have met her parents? But whatever, maybe this is like an official meeting. They go out to dinner and Justin mentions that he's really nervous and he has like tics. He doesn't tell us what the tics are, but I'm presuming it's like maybe like a twitch or a stutter or something like that. And that throughout the dinner, he begins to relax because her parents are really nice and friendly, unlike his kind of absentee parents. After dinner, he goes over to Vaya's house with her family, and August's dad tells them the story about Daisy, their dog. He said one day he was walking by and a homeless man came up to him with a dog, a puppy, and said, "Do you want this puppy?" And his dad went, "Yes," and paid for the puppy and went home and didn't consult his wife or any of that jazz, and that's how they got Daisy, and it's a very cute story. Next is Justin telling us he decides to try out for Our Town, which is the play that Vaya is going to be in and that their grade is doing. He is ultimately given the male lead, and the female lead is given to Miranda and not Vaya. If you remember Miranda from the first half, she's the friend that was kind of upsetting Vaya because they used to be really good friends, and for some reason in high school they haven't been now. Anyway, Miranda got that role instead of Vaya, which kind of made Justin sad. On the way to the bus stop, he walks with Jack, who is also leaving the house, and they are walking along and he notices that 3 boys who are walking the opposite direction, presumably Julian and maybe Miles and Henry, notice Jack and then elbow each other and like kind of go into an ice cream shop to avoid him, kind of being mean. Justin asks Jack like what's up with that and learns that it's basically because Jack is friends with August. Jack gets onto the bus and Justin runs up to these kids and says, "Don't mess with Jack anymore, you hear me?" And they all look properly cowed, and then he goes about his way. The Justin section so far is honestly a little boring. I don't want to diss Justin because RJ is really great at writing people's voices. She makes you care about who you're listening to. However, not a lot is happening. We don't actually talk to August that much. We're talking to Vaya a little bit, but I'm not as, intrigued in Vaya's story as I am in August's. The next bit is probably the most important bit from his section. During a rehearsal, we listen to Justin talk to Miranda. Miranda mentions, "Hey, did you know I know Vaya? I am like good friends with her since childhood, and I'm best friends with her brother. I'm the one who gave him that astronaut helmet. And we learn that Via has not told Justin she knows Miranda at all. We listen to Justin and Via have kind of an argument about why she never told him that. Like, did she think she would never bring it up? Like, that's so odd. But anyway, he's just a little upset because he's like, why wouldn't you tell me that? And at this point, Via breaks down a little bit and explains the situation and says she was just sad, didn't want to talk about it because they're not really friends anymore. She also mentions that she's a terrible person because she has not told her family about the play. She says that she doesn't want August to come to the play because people will know that and they'll realize that she has a brother who is facially different. And then that's all that people will talk about because right now people don't know. So she cries because she doesn't want him to come to the play and she feels awful. We end Justin's section with him laying in bed at night thinking to himself that August is actually kind of a lucky kid. While he didn't get the lottery on looks, he did on the people who love him in his life. It's clear that Justin doesn't have a lot of love in his life, so August has parents who love him, a sister who feels bad whenever she's human, he says. I don't know, he just reflects on how August is lucky in a lot of ways, which is very cute. Justin's section is a bit slow, in my opinion. We don't learn a lot of new information. It's cute, but it's mostly Via focused, and even then it's like he tries out for a play, and at this point I feel like we're just getting further and further and further away from August, and as a reader I start to lose interest. Maybe other people don't. And I feel like her goal here was to show you how August affects the people in his life, and while that makes sense, I think you could probably show that without having to jump into their perspectives. And really, how much is August affecting Justin's life, his sister's boyfriend? He gives us insight to Via, but in that case, why not just have another section from Via's point of view? I don't know, it feels a little repetitive. It feels a little redundant. It feels like we're getting far away from the point. It feels like we went off on a tangent and like never came back to the original story, and we've eaten up the middle part of the book. So at this point, I was very relieved when the next bit was actually from August's point of view. So let's jump into that. We are back to August, and it's been so long, I feel like I might not remember who he is. I'm just kidding. At this point, I'm happy to be back into August. But basically, August starts off mentioning that he and Jack's science project went great. They made a spud lamp together. He also mentions, though, there were lots of parents around. When he did the project with Summer, it was dark, and so he had a great time because not everyone was looking at him. But he mentions that this time it was more difficult. The gym was full of lights, and everyone walked by with their parents and siblings and teachers, and he just felt like he was on show, which makes sense. He follows that up by describing that the war is still going on, which is getting a little old. I don't know what the point of the war is, really, but the war is still going on, and people are leaving mean letters in his and Jack's lockers. So they respond by leaving funny letters in everyone else's lockers, being like, oh, Julian, I love you, XOXO, which is really cute and pretty smart for a 10-year-old. I don't know if I would do something like that when I was 10. I think I might just be mean. But they took the high road / the funny road, which is very cute. And he also mentions here that Julian tries to make up a lie about Jack hiring a hitman to kill him, and that from that point, some people start to forget about the war and move on. Some people even start to be nice to August. There doesn't seem to be a plague anymore, and some girl makes a joke about him being an ugly doll and gets him like a keychain, which is that like kids show, which is really cute. So that's good. And then we have a moment where he says he needs hearing aids. And we go to his hearing aids appointment. There's a doctor there telling him he needs hearing aids and holds up what it will look like. And it's this headband because August doesn't have ears. At first, August is really upset about it. But the doctor is apparently like a Star Wars dude. And they make a joke about Lobot and say like, look, put him on and you'll find that it's okay. August is really bummed until he turns on the hearing aids, and then he can suddenly hear the world around him, and he's so excited. He even thinks it might be a big deal at school, but then he goes, and everyone's really nice about it. Almost no one mentions it. Then we have some information about the play. August says that he overhears his mom and Via arguing about the play because Via told her about it, but that their voices get really hushed all of a sudden, and even with his new hearing aids, he can't understand them. At dinner that night, his mom mentions that Via's in a play, but she and August will stay home, and August's dad will go see Via's play. And suddenly Via's like, what, you're punishing me? Like, you should both come. You shouldn't stay home just because I told you about it. And her mom's like, Via, this is only fair. And August, surprising everyone, says, look, I know what's going on, okay? Via doesn't want her new friends to know about me, but you're treating me like I'm stupid, and I'm not. And he runs up the stairs and throws himself on his bed. After a while of being left alone in his room, August starts to wonder why no one has followed him in. Eventually, Via does enter, although she doesn't come in the way he expects. Instead of feeling sorry or, embarrassed, she comes in a hurry, telling him to come downstairs. He says, look, I'm not interested in talking to you. And she says, not everything is about you, August. Come downstairs. They're taking Daisy to the vet. And they run downstairs. Now, do you remember in part 1 where I told you that usually someone ends up dying if you bring up, subjects of death? Welp. I wonder how many of you guessed the dog. Anyway, they go downstairs and his mom's carrying the dog. August is very confused. He's like, why are you taking her? What's going on? And they don't have time to explain it. Instead, he and Via both just say bye to Daisy and give her hugs, and they watch as their mom gets in the taxi with their dad and drives off. This is where Via tells August what happened. After August went upstairs, she says that Daisy started moaning and whimpering and whining, and it was really worrying. So her mom went over to touch Daisy, and Daisy bit her. She explains to August that apparently Daisy has been sick for a long while, and August just never noticed. Apparently she's been dizzy or sick just a lot lately, and so they're taking her to the vet because they don't want her to suffer anymore. They pile up all her toys into a little pile and stare at it and just kind of feel sad, which is so sad. That night, no one comes to tuck in August, so he goes to check on his parents, and his dad is kind of silently crying, so August backs out of the door and puts himself to bed and thinks about Daisy, which is just such a bummer. I'm at that point in life where me and all my other friends are kind of losing our childhood animals, so this really hit me. I was like, no, it's so sad. No one likes to lose a pet, especially a family pet you've had since you were a kid. And this is a good example of how RJ can write really well in voice and emotion and make you feel things through relatable experience. I think that's why this book is such a big deal and why so many people have read it and why they love it, is because despite any issues I might have with it, it makes you feel something. Moving past the dead dog, we are now at Via's play. Yay! Now, we learned that Via is not the female lead like we learned in Justin's section. Instead, she is the understudy to the female lead. So why was it such a big deal that her parents didn't come? I don't know, but apparently it was a big deal to her. And as we're sitting there, August overhears his parents mention that, oh, Miranda's the lead. She looks so different. Did you know her father is getting remarried and he has a baby on the way already? And August's mom is shocked. And then the curtain goes up and Via comes out on stage. They are so shocked. What happened to Miranda? Anyway, they finish up the play. It all goes great. August runs up afterwards and Via introduces him and her family to their theater director, who looks very shocked. And then August starts to feel a little dizzy. Maybe he feels a little overwhelmed by all the sound. He suddenly can't find his family for a minute, and he's like, Via, Mom, Dad, can't find them, too many people. And all of a sudden, hands pick him up out of the crowd, and he turns around, and it's Miranda. She lifted him up, and he says, Miranda, and she says, hey, Major Tom. And after that, what do you think happens? What do you think happens? What happens is we switch from August to Miranda. Ugh. You guys, at this point, I kind of want to slam my head through a glass door. I don't know how to convey to you how I felt at this moment, because we had just gotten back into August, and it's for one chapter before we switch to Miranda. And honestly, the most irritating part is that Miranda's section doesn't need to be there. You could cut it out. It wouldn't make any difference in your reading. It's come to my attention by now that what RJ is trying to do is show the effect August has on his friends and family. And while I get that's important, you can still show that without putting me in the head of another person. You can show that to me by how they react in certain situations or how August sees them reacting. We did that throughout the first half of the book. So I don't know why she feels we have to be in the heads of these people in order to understand them, because it's just not necessary. And with Miranda, she's kind of a sideline character, and everything that happens in her section has no bearing on the future and changes absolutely nothing about my thoughts on the past. Miranda is barely mentioned in Vaya's section, which is barely mentioned. So I'm not sure why RJ would think I'm interested in Miranda's point of view. I mean, we're kind of wondering why she wasn't the lead that night, but that's the only thing I think about Miranda, other than nothing. So I'm going to move us through Miranda's section kind of quickly because it has no bearing on the story. So we're just going to go through it. Are you ready? Miranda's story is basically how she and Vaya fell apart and why she didn't go on stage opening night. What happened is her parents got divorced that summer and she went off to camp. While she was at camp, she basically pretended to be Vaya. She said that she has a brother who is deformed. I don't really like that word, but that's the word she uses, so I'll use that in this section. So she mentions that she has a brother who's deformed, and all the popular girls love her for it and hang out with her, and they smoke and do all these crazy things. And when she gets home, she doesn't talk to Vaya because she doesn't want to explain things like how she pretended to be her for a whole summer. She also mentions that she feels entitled to the lie that she is August's sister because she cares so much about him. She gave him the astronaut helmet. She seems to really cling to that fact that she gave him the helmet, like that was helpful, or that she just had a big effect in his life, I guess. And then she talks about how she chose the theater elective because she noticed Vaya chose the theater elective. She talks about how she has a boyfriend named Zach, and then she was a little bit jealous whenever she realized that Vaya had a boyfriend named Justin. So basically what's happening here is, in my opinion, Miranda doesn't get a lot of love or attention at home, and Vaya does. And I'm sure that girl jealousy and feelings of, hurt just led her to wanting to be popular and wanting to be more like Vaya, and therefore cutting her out of her life. She goes so far as to tell the theater director that she can't be an Elephant Man, the play, because she has a brother who's deformed, which explains why the theater director was so shocked when he saw August, who is Vaya's brother, and not Miranda's brother. She then moves to opening night. She says on opening night, no one was coming to see her. Her mom wasn't going to be there. Her dad wasn't going to be there. Her boyfriend wasn't even going to be there. That they would all see her the next night. And that when she saw Vaya's family and August sitting in the middle row or wherever they are, that she told the theater director that she was sick and couldn't go on and she just wasn't going to do it. And so Vaya came in, took her costume from her, and went out. We get a little bit of an interaction where Vaya says, "Why are you doing this?" but doesn't have time to answer before she's pulled on stage. And she does a great job. Miranda says that it was a little bittersweet because she got like a standing ovation. But then afterwards, she was happy that she made Vaya's family happy. And she notices August in the crowd and picks him up, and they invite her to their house to hang out and eat dinner or whatever afterwards, and she accepts. And that's basically the Miranda section. It's not that long. It's honestly not that interesting. It explains some questions we had, but not a lot. And it's a little weird because she obviously has some sort of obsession with Vaya, not in like a creepy way, but maybe in like a weird way. And it seems like she kind of gets over it. There's just a lot happening in her life. And it does seem like she truly cares about Vaya's family. But like I said before, we kind of didn't need this section. It doesn't tell us really anything about August other than that she feels connected to him and she feels like August brings interest to her life in a way that she doesn't have. So some people, I guess, think August is a really great influence on their life. I guess that's what we're supposed to take away from that section. Anyway, let's move on to the next section where we go back to August. So we've flashed from August to Miranda back to August, which makes me question why Miranda wasn't just lumped in next to Justin. Like, why did we go to August and then just go back to Miranda and then back to August? It felt discombobulated. I think that this ending bit here seems to fall apart for me a little bit in terms of structure. Structure is kind of how you've organized the plot. So the structure for me of putting Miranda not with all of the other perspectives, but like randomly in the middle of August is just an odd choice. I understand that she had to set up the play, but she could have set up the play with Miranda. She could have told you Miranda's point of view first and then August's point of view, and it probably wouldn't have made that much of a difference. So, and then this next bit also seems to fall apart for me a little bit because August starts off by telling us that the fifth graders every year go for 3 days and 2 nights to, what is it called? The Broarwood Nature Preserve in Pennsylvania. So they go there and he's feeling kind of nervous because he hasn't done well with sleepovers in the past. But he's also excited because he gets to go to a cool preserve with all of his friends. That's an adorable way to start August's story. But I just question why we jumped from the play to like a retreat that I've never heard of in this entire book so far. It just feels odd because we just got a play from 2 different perspectives. And supposedly Miranda came over for the night and we never get to see the ending of that. And instead, there's a retreat coming up that we're looking at instead. It feels like someone changed the conversation right in the middle of something. It'd be like me talking to you right now and then saying, I love my cat. It just comes out of nowhere. Like, it makes a little bit of sense, but comes out of nowhere. So anyway, let's move on. August mentions that he'd like a new duffel bag for the retreat because he doesn't want to be known for Star Wars because currently he has a Star Wars duffel bag. He mentions to his mom he wants to spice up his image. This is RJ trying to tell us he's growing up a little bit, I think, even though the idea that you have to let go of things you like in order to grow up, I think is kind of questionable. But I understand what she's going for. So he's growing up. He no longer is obsessed with Star Wars and just wants a plain duffel bag. While packing, he comes across a black bear stuffed animal named Babu, which we've never heard about so far, and puts it in his duffel bag to take with him. His mom's like, do you want to take that? And he's like, yeah, why not? I'll just have it with me. This is another example of RJ trying to show us how Augie is in terms of growth. So he's grown enough to know he doesn't want to have a Star Wars duffel bag, but he hasn't quite grown up enough to get rid of stuffed animals. I'll be completely honest, I still have stuffed animals. I don't take them on trips with me, but I'm also like 20 something. So when I was 10, I think it would have been fine for me to take a stuffed animal, but what can you do? His mom tells him, be careful of your hearing aids because they can't get wet. They were really expensive, so don't break them. And August says, okay, Mom, thanks for the warning. Good night. I don't need you to put me to bed. And she says, okay. And he climbs in bed and he falls asleep the night before the retreat. In the morning, he wakes up and thinks that he sees Daisy's ghost on his bed. I'm not quite sure what RJ was aiming for there, but August says he feels stronger by her ghost, and he leaves his bear at home with a note attached to him saying, hey, Mom, if you miss me, cuddle this bear, which is really cute, except I honestly think that a 10-year-old wouldn't think of that. I don't know. When I was in 5th grade, first of all, I used to think I would hurt my stuffed animal's feelings if I left them at home. So leaving my stuffed animal for my mom because I think she might miss me, I feel like isn't something would occur to me when I was 10. This is another example of why I think it would have worked better if August was maybe in 6th grade or 7th grade. But I'm turning into a broken record about it, so let's move on. He gets on the bus and we learn that Julian is not coming on this trip. I'm going to tell you that at this point, I was a little confused. This whole chapter/section to me has been confusing because I'll tell you why. First, we skipped ahead in time to a treat that we've never heard about. Second, we learned that his hearing aids are expensive. And the only reason why that's confusing to me is because despite all the mentions of August's surgeries and issues, we've never mentioned money before. Why would you bring it up now? We don't even know what August's parents do. This implies to me that they're not as, comfortable with money as maybe I was assuming before. It's an issue that she's never brought up before, said in passing. So I just wonder what she wants to accomplish by that. I think she just wants to bring up the hearing aids, but if you were going to bring them up, I think you should bring them up in a different way other than relating to money if you've never mentioned money before. Third, Julian isn't coming on the retreat, which makes no sense to me because he's been our bad guy. So far, this entire book has been a struggle between Julian and August and his friends. And all of a sudden, this retreat doesn't even include Julian. He's just faded out of the picture. which makes me wonder why he was included in the first place. And second, makes me wonder why I'm reading, because at this point, if he's going to have a nice weekend, and that'll be the end of it, then what's the point? There's nothing for me to look forward to as a reader. There's no motivation for me to finish this off. Anyway, we move on, and August mentions that they are having a great first day. RJ starts to move really quickly through time when she hasn't really done that before, so I feel like she's getting close to something, but I don't know what we're doing right now. But anyway, what happens is they arrive, they go on a nature tour, they find their cabins, it rains and he has to protect his hearing aids, and they spend the night by the fire and they go to bed. The next day, they go horseback riding, which, what? Private school lets you go horseback riding for a weekend. I want to go there. And then they go tree rappelling, and he writes a letter to his family. And then they go to some fairgrounds in the reserve, I guess, to watch a movie. And the movie is Sound of Music. And they're just hanging out watching the movie. And like I said, at this point, it's starting to fall apart a little bit for me, the storytelling. But I'm going to talk about that more in our discussion. So let me tell you what happens next. Jack tells August that he has to go pee, so they go together to the woods so Jack can pee. First off, I didn't know that boys did this. I think this is a girl thing. Like, RJ is a girl, so I think she might be assuming that boys do this. But I'm pretty sure that a boy wouldn't be like, hey, friend, let's go pee in the woods together. Because that's a little weird for boys to do, right? Like, I'm not saying it has to be. I'm just saying most boys I know don't do that. On their walk back, they run into some kids. These are pretty big kids. They're described to be probably 7th graders. And the leader of their group is kind of this guy named Eddie, who's huge. They're all calling him Eddie. As they walk up to the group, they're shining their flashlights around, and a girl starts screaming. And they're saying, "What is that? What is that?" And August realizes that they're pointing the flashlights at his face. Eddie starts to call him names and make fun of him in general to the group, and they're all laughing. He's calling him Gollum, Alien. He says something, August does, and he goes, "It talks!" And in general, they're just being terrible and awful, and they're engaging in the worst behavior we've seen so far in the book. I mean, so far up to now, we've had mean kids stuff, but this is straight up bullying for, like, malice, which is not great. Jack stands up and says, "Leave him alone. Like, come on, chill." And Eddie has a problem with that and gets physical and pushes Jack onto the ground. This is where August says, "Hey, please don't do that." And Eddie just takes that as more fanning the flames, and it just gets worse. This is when Amos, Miles, and Henry come out of the woods. They were hearing something, I guess. They were nearby. And they say, "Hey, knock it off. Like, come on, August. Come on, Jack. Let's go back to our movie." And Eddie's like, "Nuh-uh." And he yanks on August's hood and pulls him to the ground. This is when Amos sails over August and just tackles Eddie to the ground. And suddenly there's lots of screaming as 2 people yank on August's arms to get him to run. They're running through the woods. It's dark. And eventually August realizes that Henry was pulling his hand, running away from the mean kids. August is upset, but they're all so happy because they defeated those big bullies, like they got out of it alive. So they're giving each other high fives. And August goes, "Yeah, that was awesome," and puts up his hand, which is so cute because he's putting himself out there for a high five, unsure if they'll high five him back. And Amos high fives him, which is so adorable. It's so cute. But tragedy strikes when August realizes that his hearing aids are missing. He can't hear anything. His mom told him they were expensive. So they go back to look for the hearing aids, but they can't find them. And August starts to cry a little bit because obviously that was a harrowing experience. And Amos gives him a really big hug, which is really, really cute. It's a very heartwarming moment. The rest of the trip passes in normalcy, with August reminiscing about that lamb to slaughter comment that his dad made that suddenly makes sense to him now, which is a real big bummer. But he gets home safe and sound. He tells his parents about his hearing aids. They say, "Don't worry about it," and they give him big hugs. That night for dinner, Via and his dad are running late, and it's because they got a new puppy. They named him Bear, which is super adorable. Now, I'm getting a little short on time, so I'm going to move a little bit quickly now, and don't feel like you're missing anything because RJ also moves quickly. Basically, after that, August's day at school is amazing. There's a huge shift in how everyone treats him. They're giving him high fives and knuckle punches, and in general, being really sweet to him. August also has a meeting with Mr. Tushman where Mr. Tushman tells him they found out who it was who beat him up and took his hearing aids and all that stuff. His name is Eddie from a different school. He asks August if he wants to press charges, to which August says someone like that won't learn a lesson, which I think is an older and wiser comment than a 10-year-old should be making. And then he says, also, by the way, Julian will not be attending Beecher Prep next year, which delights August and also me. The precept for June is follow the day, reach for the sun, which is very cute because 5th grade graduation is happening. His dad drops him off for graduation at the school. He got a haircut, which is apparently cute. And his dad tells him that back in the day, he's the one who threw out his astronaut helmet because he hated that August felt he had to hide himself, which makes a lot of sense to me. And they joke around about it, which is very cute. He sits down with Jack and Summer, and Mr. Tushman makes a speech. He says, usually my speeches go on longer than necessary, but today I'm just going to keep it short. I have a quote, and it says, be kinder than necessary. And he talks a lot about kindness. And eventually they're giving out awards to people, and August starts to zone out a little bit. And he comes back in when Mr. Tushman starts to get choked up because he's talking about I think it's called the Henry Ward Beecher Medal, which is given to kids who exhibit kindness, friendship, character, and courage. He's getting choked up and everyone's crying, and they announce that it's Augie, he got it. People start chanting his name, and he gets up and accepts the medal. Mrs. Garcia is crying. He knows that he is ordinary, and he understands why he's getting the award, and he is so happy. Everyone ends up taking pictures together, and he's no longer bothered by the fact that he's in pictures. His whole grade surrounds him for a group picture, and he's having the best time. And on the walk home with all of his friends, his mom mentions that, Augie, you really are a wonder. And that's the end of Wonder. So I can finally tell you about all my thoughts about it. Are you ready? So let's talk first about what RJ does really, really well. She does characterization so well. So all that means is making a character feel real. She very quickly makes characters feel real to me and make me feel involved in their story. I want August to turn out well. I want Vaya to have a good relationship. These are all things that I want because she put me in their heads, and she's great at that. She's great at voice, and that means making each character sound different. That's one of those things where when switching perspectives, I kind of get a feel for who's talking, even if she hadn't told me. So if Summer starts talking, I feel like I know who's speaking, And that ties into dialogue, which she's also really great at. In part 1, I mentioned that the adults are kind of stiff, but as the novel goes on, it gets really well. I feel like I can almost tell that she gets better at writing as she writes the book, or the dialogue just gets better. All the dialogue between the kids sounds so accurate. And I think she captures the childlike feel pretty well. I think she does make them too mature at certain points. I feel like if you put them in the shoes of 6th graders, it would make more sense. But the things that kids do, like the war and like Halloween and all that kind of stuff, that feels real. That feels like something kids would do. So she crushes it. She did a great job. This book made me cry. It's a really heartwarming read. I read it really quickly because the pacing is great. There's short chapters and you feel like you're reading so fast. You don't feel like it's a chore to read this book. It's really nice. It's an easy read. It's a great read if you're going on vacation or if you're on a beach somewhere, or if you just want to stay up reading all night long like I did. So let's move on to some things that I think she could have done better. I think structure could have been better. I talked about that previously. It's how the plot is organized. So we move from, August being homeschooled, August being at school fighting Julian, a bunch of different people's perspectives, August briefly back to Miranda, and August on a retreat with none of the original characters. And I feel like it feels like it's in pieces. It feels like someone dumped a puzzle piece on a table and they're still in the middle of putting it together. I feel like the flow of it and the transitions are a little harsh. I think that it could have been done better. I don't think it's it's not like a deal breaker, but I think that the book could have been just so amazing if everything had melded together well. And I think part of why the structure feels poor is because of what I want to call her comparisons. By comparisons, I mean that a lot of events in the book occur and then kind of fade out for no reason. And this is the same thing with the point of view. They occur and then they fade out for no reason. And it's not that they fade out and later it has an effect on the story, because that's different. That's what I mean for no reason. They happen. I experience Justin's point of view, but it doesn't change how I see August or what happens in the rest of the book. Julian is a really big part of the first half of the book, but has almost no impact on the second half of the book. So why was he written? That's what I mean to say. And what I think these are attempts at comparisons. I think RJ is trying to show you the growth of people around August and in August by giving you people and events to compare them to. So the war like happens and then it's never mentioned again, and it doesn't have any bearing on the future. And I think the point of that was to show that one day there was a war and then they got over it, and so it got better. But in order for me to feel like as a reader that had a purpose, I want to see that the war had an effect. Maybe it hurt August and it still hurts him later, but he's finding himself ready to forgive. I don't know, but it's one of those things where if an event happens, I need to know that that event had a reason for being there other than acting as a measuring stick for how people act. That's a good way to put it. It's almost like these events are just so you can say, well, in the beginning there was the plague, and later they give him high fives. And it just offers you a measuring stick between how people treat August, and that's not why it should be there. If you offer a problem in a novel, what I want to see is the resolve of that problem. I want to see August step forward and work out those issues himself, and then they work together to fix it. Not that these problems fade away, because quite honestly, that problem probably wouldn't fade away. Things don't fade when you're a kid. When you're a kid, you deal with them, and maybe you talk to the person and figure out a solution, and then you move on. Maybe that's what it is all these issues just kind of leave, and we never hear about them again, and it seems like they almost could have never been there, and it wouldn't have made a difference because August feels the same to us. That's another issue that I want to discuss is August's growth. This is also a comparison kind of thing because I've mentioned from the beginning that August feels too old in my head. RJ uses exterior environmental things to show August's growth. She doesn't use the voice in his head. And I have an issue with that because I wish that she used the voice in his head. I wish that when we start out, he doesn't understand why people do things. He doesn't quite get it. And then at the end, he does. I'd rather see that growth than him taking down Star Wars posters and not taking stuffed animals. And that's how he grows up, right? Like he had a haircut, so therefore he's older now, is less meaningful to me than he understands how to work with others now, and that's personal growth. Lastly, what I want to talk about is kind of a little bit more nebulous. It has less to do with the book and the writing and more to do with the big ideas. I finished this book and a part of me felt a little uncomfortable by it just because of the representation of physical differences in the book. I'm not saying she does it poorly. However, I am saying I think she could have handled it better. We never learn what August's issue is, for example, and throughout the novel we're told he doesn't have a disability, he doesn't have special needs, and so the only thing different about August is the way he looks. If this is supposed to be a book about being kind to people who are different than us, I would hope that it would be kind to people who are different intrinsically in their personality or in their person, rather than just physical looks. I just think it would have been a deeper message to send. I also think, on the term of message, that August receiving an award at the end of the book is a little problematic for me. It's really heartwarming to read, but my issue with it is that throughout the book, August is a really passive character. What we're really reading is how people react to August, not how August reacts to the world. And I wish we saw August be his own character and make choices and react and solve problems on his own rather than watching everyone else learn to enjoy him. And at the end of the book, he gets an award for kindness. And this, I just question it because August hasn't done anything kind. I mean, he hasn't been outwardly mean, but he hasn't done 500 hours worth of volunteer work. It's not that he has gone out of his way to be kind to the people around him. It's just that people learned to be kind to him, so he gets an award. And I think this goes to the bottom message of the book. I did some research about how people felt about it, especially people with ichthyosis and certain physical differences. And they mentioned that while it's a really cute story, they don't always want kindness. They always want respect. They don't want to be condescended to. And it's almost like August didn't do anything to deserve this award for kindness. None of his actions did. So he shouldn't be receiving an award just because he's different. That's not the point. I wish that it had been an award because August is supposed to be really smart. Could he not have been, the valedictorian or academic excellence? Like that is an award based on your accomplishments, not on your person. It's like that saying that you shouldn't compliment a woman based on something she has no control over. So you can say, I like the outfit you chose today, but to say, wow, the brown of your hair is pretty is kind of odd because she has no control over that. That's how my brain went here, is that he has no control over how he looks, but he does have control over how he does in school. Like, why weren't we giving him an award for his actions rather than his person? I noticed that this book was going to be discussed in schools and it's been included in curriculums, and I wanted to question it and ask you guys what you think truly, because RJ doesn't have any experience with disabilities or with physical differences. She's a normal person like you and I. This is not an own voices author, which means it's not written from the point of view of someone who is the same as their main character. So it's just one of those things where I think we have to question how accurate it portrays it, because while I feel it in my heart, I don't know if this story did as well as it could in the representation of people who are different from me and people who accomplish things with those differences and with the help of those differences, not despite them. And like I said, I wish that we had gotten more of August's actions and less of how everyone treats him. So that's just my final thoughts. I really liked Wonder, and it was a great read. But the point of reading for me is that if I'm left with questions, I'm going to wonder about them. Wonder, ha. And in this case, I want to make sure that I read books that represent people well, and that people like August who read a book who are different than you and I feel like it's an accurate portrayal. But I've talked your ear off for way longer than necessary now, and I really appreciate you sticking by with me and listening along. I had so many thoughts about this novel, and I had some I didn't even get to in this episode, if you can believe it. But I just had a great time talking about it. So I hope that you enjoyed it. Thanks for sticking by for the 2-part episode. And I'll see you next week for our episode on To Kill a Mockingbird, which I've been reading and is really good, and I have a lot of thoughts on. If you liked today's episodes or any of my other episodes, please rate and review us on whatever platform you use. It really helps the podcast get noticed. And if you want to follow us on our other accounts, we're at Bad Book Club Pod on everything: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that jazz. I also, by the way, have a link below to our website and to our bookshop where you can buy the books I talk about and support a local bookstore, which is awesome. Thank you so much for keeping up with me and for keeping up with Wonder, and I'll see you guys next week. Goodbye, lovelies.